Snow drifted over London like falling feathers, soft and steady, covering Hyde Park in a quiet shimmer. Lanterns glowed warmly from the tree branches, turning the walkways into rivers of gold. Families wandered through the park hand in hand, children darting in and out of the snowflakes, their laughter spilling into the night. Carolers sang near the water, their voices rising like a gentle chorus carried on the cold wind. Moving through all this joy was a man who seemed untouched by it. Sebastian Blackwood, the Duke of Ravenshollow, walked with the heavy steps of someone carrying more than grief, someone carrying the weight of an entire life. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and sharply elegant, the kind of man people whispered about but never truly understood. His grey eyes had the reputation of being colder than winter itself. People feared him in Parliament, admired him in ballrooms, but no one got close enough to know him. And tonight, he couldn't have felt more alone. 3 weeks had passed since he buried his mother. His father had gone years earlier, but losing her, that loss hollowed him out in a way he hadn't been prepared for. She had been the only person who softened the edges of his iron world. Now his country estate felt empty. His townhouse in Grosvenor Square felt like a museum of memories. Holiday invitations piled up unanswered, celebration was the last thing he could bear. He found a secluded bench far from the glowing paths and sat, letting the stillness wrap around him. Snow gathered on his coat as he held himself rigid, fighting the storm rising inside him. But grief, real grief, never asks permission. His chest tightened. His breath shook. The composure he guarded so fiercely slipped away, and for the first time in years, Sebastian bowed his head, and cried. Not the silent, measured tears of a disciplined man. Real, breaking sobs that cracked the armor everyone believed was unshatterable. He covered his face with gloved hands, trying to hide from a world that wasn't even looking his way. Why are you crying? The tiny voice was so unexpected that Sebastian flinched. He lifted his head to find a small boy standing in front of him, bundled in a wool coat that nearly swallowed him whole. A scarf hung crooked around his neck. His cheeks were flushed red from the cold. In one mitten, he held a half-eaten biscuit. In the other, a wrinkled handkerchief that had seen far too many uses. My mama says crying makes the inside part of the heart feel lighter, the boy said earnestly, offering the handkerchief. This side is clean. Well, mostly. Sebastian stared at him, startled into silence. No one spoke to him this way. No one approached him this way. And yet here was a child, completely unafraid, offering comfort as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I appreciate that, Sebastian said, his voice hoarse, but you needn't. Is it because of Christmas? The boy asked, ignoring the refusal as he climbed onto the bench beside the Duke with fearless familiarity. I was sad last Christmas, too. My papa went to the angels. Mama says they needed him. I think they were being greedy, but she told me not to say that anymore. The blunt honesty made something unfamiliar tug at Sebastian's chest, a sound that almost resembled a laugh. Your father, he said gently. He passed, the boy answered simply. Mama cried for days. Then she said we had to be brave because Papa wouldn't want us to be sad forever. He studied Sebastian with eyes far too wise for his age. Are you alone, too? Sebastian didn't intend to answer, but the truth came out anyway. My mother died recently. Oh. The boy's face softened instantly. That's the worst kind of sad. Mamas are the best at everything. Even better than puppies. Puppies lick more, though. Sebastian blinked, torn between grief and an unexpected warmth spreading through him. You should get a new mama, the boy declared with conviction. Sebastian let out a breath that might have been a laugh. It doesn't quite work that way. It should, the boy insisted. When Mrs. Potter's cat went to the angels, she got another cat and now she smiles again. People, Sebastian murmured, aren't quite the same as cats. The boy frowned thoughtfully, then brightened as though a brilliant idea had struck him. You could come to our house instead, he announced. For Christmas. Mama makes the best biscuits, and she's good at fixing sad hearts. She helps mine every day. And there, in the middle of a snowy London night, a child's innocent invitation cracked open the frozen world of the Duke in a way nothing else ever had. Timothy Ashworth, a woman's voice called out, tinged with panic. Timothy, where have you gone? That's Mama. Timothy jumped up, still holding Sebastian's hand. Mama, over here. I found someone who needs your help. Sebastian tried to stand, to compose himself, to somehow transform back into the formidable Duke of Ravenshollow before this woman arrived, but Timothy's grip on his hand was surprisingly strong, and his face was still wet with tears. There was absolutely no way to salvage his dignity. A figure emerged from between the trees, moving quickly through the snow. She was petite, wrapped in a dark blue cloak, her bonnet slightly askew as if she'd been running. As she came closer, Sebastian could see she was perhaps 28 or 30, with delicate features and brown eyes that currently reflected both relief at finding her son and alarm at the situation she discovered. She stopped dead when she saw Timothy holding hands with a tall, dark-haired gentleman whose expensive greatcoat and aristocratic bearing were unmistakable even through his obvious distress. Timothy. Her voice came out as a mortified whisper. What are you? Your Grace. She recognized him, and her face flooded with color. I am so terribly sorry. Timothy, release His Grace's hand this instant. But Mama, he's sad, Timothy protested, tightening his grip on Sebastian's hand. His mama died just like Papa did, and he was crying all alone, and it's Christmas Eve. We can't just leave him here. The woman, Mrs. Ashworth, Sebastian's mind supplied, looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Timothy, His Grace is, the Duke has. You cannot simply. She took a deep breath, clearly trying to gather her composure. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled, though her cheeks remained pink with embarrassment. Your Grace, please forgive my son's forwardness. He sometimes forgets his manners in his enthusiasm to help others. But Sebastian surprised himself by speaking first. Please don't apologize. Your son has been unexpectedly kind. I find I'm grateful for the company. Mrs. Ashworth's eyes widened slightly. She studied his face, still marked with tears despite his attempts to compose himself, and something softened in her expression. Mama, I told him about your biscuits, Timothy said proudly. And about how you make everyone feel better. And I said he should come have Christmas with us because nobody should be alone on Christmas, and Papa would say that's the right thing to do, wouldn't he? Timothy. Mrs. Ashworth's voice held equal parts exasperation and affection. She looked at Sebastian with obvious mortification. Your Grace, I cannot apologize enough. My son has a very generous heart, but he doesn't quite understand the boundaries of. Are your biscuits truly as delicious as he claims? Sebastian heard himself ask. Mrs. Ashworth blinked, clearly not expecting the question. Yes, I suppose they're quite good. I use my grandmother's recipe with cinnamon, and... She stopped, seeming to realize the absurdity of discussing biscuits with the Duke of Ravenshollow in Hyde Park on Christmas Eve. Your Grace, surely you have plans for the evening. Timothy shouldn't have presumed. I have no plans. The admission came out more starkly than Sebastian intended. My mother recently passed, and I find myself, that is, He couldn't finish. The grief rose up again, catching in his throat. Oh, you poor man, Mrs. Ashworth said softly, and the genuine compassion in her voice nearly undid him completely. I lost my husband last year. I know something of that particular darkness. Their eyes met, and in that moment Sebastian saw someone who truly understood, not someone offering empty condolences or awkward platitudes, but someone who had walked through the same valley of grief. Mrs. Ashworth bit her lip, clearly torn between propriety and compassion. Sebastian watched her internal struggle with unexpected intensity, realizing that he desperately wanted her to extend the invitation her son had offered. "Your Grace," she said finally, her voice gentle, "if you truly have no other commitments this evening, and if you could forgive the informality and the certain chaos that comes with a 5-year-old's presence, Timothy and I would be honored to share our Christmas Eve supper with you." "There will be biscuits," Timothy added enthusiastically. "And Mama always makes too much food anyway, and I know lots of stories and songs." "Oliver, breathe," his mother said with a small smile before turning back to Sebastian. "Truly, Your Grace, you would be most welcome. Our home is modest compared to your own, I'm certain, but there's warmth and good food, and—" She hesitated. "Perhaps we could all use the company on what can be a rather lonely evening." Sebastian knew he should decline. This was irregular at best. Yet as he looked at Timothy's hopeful face and saw the understanding in Mrs. Ashworth's eyes, Edmund found all his objections dissolving like snow in the warmth of their kindness. "I would like that very much," he said quietly. "If you're certain it wouldn't be an imposition." "Not at all," Timothy crowed, jumping up and down. "Mama, the Duke is coming to Christmas. Papa would be so happy. Remember how he always said we should help people who are sad?" Mrs. Ashworth's eyes grew bright with unshed tears, but she smiled. "Yes, darling. Papa would indeed be very happy." She turned to Sebastian. "Come then, Your Grace. Our house is just a short walk from here. And please, call me Charlotte. I think if we're to share Christmas Eve, we can dispense with some formalities." "Sebastian," he replied, feeling something loosen in his chest. "Please call me Sebastian." The morning sun streamed through the frost-covered windows of Sebastian's Grosvenor Square mansion, but for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel the familiar weight of emptiness pressing down upon him. Instead, he found himself thinking of warm brown eyes, Timothy's infectious laughter, and the way Charlotte's face had softened when she spoke of her late husband. Christmas Day had passed in a blur of solitary contemplation. He'd attended morning service at St. George's, more out of habit than devotion, then returned to his empty house where his staff had prepared a feast he had no appetite for. But throughout the day, his thoughts kept returning to the modest house on Upper Brook Street, wondering what Timothy and Charlotte were doing, whether the boy was enjoying his presence, whether Charlotte was finding moments of joy amid her own grief. By Boxing Day morning, Sebastian could stand it no longer. Against every rule of propriety he'd ever been taught, he found himself walking the familiar path to Mayfair, a wrapped gift tucked under his arm, a set of lead soldiers he'd purchased from Hamley's that morning, far more elaborate than Timothy's wooden ones. Charlotte answered the door herself, her eyes widening in surprise. She wore a simple morning dress of deep green wool, her hair pinned back less formally than it had been 2 nights before, with soft tendrils framing her face. She looked younger, more relaxed, and Sebastian felt that now familiar flutter in his chest. "Sebastian," she said softly, then caught herself. "Your Grace, we weren't expecting." "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," he said, suddenly uncertain. "I brought something for Timothy, and I found myself—" He paused, searching for words that wouldn't reveal how desperately he'd wanted to return to this house, to these people who had somehow begun to heal something broken inside him. "Sebastian." Timothy's voice rang out from somewhere in the house. "Is that Sebastian, Mama?" Before Charlotte could respond, the boy came barreling down the hallway, still in his nightshirt and slippers, his hair sticking up at impossible angles. "You came back. I knew you would. Mama said you probably wouldn't because dukes are very busy, but I knew you liked us too much to stay away." "Timothy," Charlotte said, her cheeks flushing pink, "you can't simply assume. His Grace has many important—" "Actually," Sebastian interrupted, crouching down to Timothy's level. "I find I'm not nearly as busy as I thought. And I brought you something." Timothy's eyes went wide as Sebastian presented the wrapped package. With the single-minded focus only a child could possess, Timothy tore at the paper, gasping when he revealed the elaborate set of painted lead soldiers, complete with horses, cannons, and a detailed command tent. "These are the finest soldiers I've ever seen." Timothy breathed, his small hands reverent as he examined each piece. "Look, Mama, they have real uniforms and everything." "Sebastian, these must have cost a fortune." "Timothy," Charlotte said sharply, "that's not polite to." "It's quite all right," Sebastian assured her, rising to his full height. "And they didn't cost nearly as much as seeing that expression on his face is worth." Their eyes met over Timothy's head, and Sebastian saw something shift in Charlotte's expression, surprise, perhaps, or a dawning realization that his interest in her son was genuine, not merely the casual charity of a wealthy man. "Would you?" She began hesitantly, "Would you care to come in? I was just preparing tea, and Timothy would love to show you how these soldiers compare to his wooden ones." "I would like that very much." As they settled in the cozy parlor, Timothy arranging his new soldiers alongside his old ones with military precision, Sebastian found himself studying Charlotte more closely. In the warm light of her own home, without the formal constraints of their first meeting, she seemed more at ease, more herself. She moved with quiet grace as she served tea, and when she smiled at something Timothy said, her entire face lit up. "You're very kind to indulge him," she said softly, settling beside Sebastian on the small sofa. "He's been chattering about you since Christmas Eve. I fear he's quite taken with having a duke for a friend." "The feeling is mutual," Sebastian replied, watching Timothy arrange his troops. "He's remarkable, Charlotte. You've raised an extraordinary child." A shadow crossed her face. "I can't take all the credit. William he was wonderful with Timothy. They had such plans together." Her voice caught slightly. "Sometimes I fear I'm not enough, that Timothy needs more than I can give him." Sebastian set down his teacup, turning to face her fully. "Charlotte, that boy adores you. Anyone can see that. And from what I observed the other night, you're giving him exactly what he needs: love, security, and the kind of warmth that can't be taught or bought." "You speak as though you know something of lacking such things," she said quietly, her perceptive brown eyes searching his face. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, watching Timothy's serious concentration as he positioned his soldiers. "My childhood was different. Proper. Cold, I suppose. My father believed affection made men weak. My mother provided what warmth she could, but always within the bounds of what was appropriate for a future duke." "That sounds lonely." It was. The admission surprised him. He'd never acknowledged that loneliness before, even to himself. "I learned early that emotion was a liability, that distance was safety. It served me well in business, in parliament, in society. But when my mother died..." He trailed off, unable to finish. Charlotte's hand covered his, warm and gentle. "Grief has a way of stripping away all our carefully constructed defenses, doesn't it? After William died, I felt so exposed, so raw. Every emotion felt too big for my body." "How did you bear it?" "Timothy," she said simply. "He needed me to function, to continue. Children don't allow you the luxury of complete despair." And gradually, I realized that feeling everything so deeply meant I was still alive, still capable of love. The pain was proof that what William and I shared was real and precious." Sebastian stared at their joined hands, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. "I've spent so many years avoiding feeling anything that I'd forgotten what it was like to truly live. And now..." He looked up to find her watching him intently, her expression open and hopeful. "Now I find myself wanting things I never thought I'd want. A family. A home filled with laughter instead of silence. Someone to share both joy and sorrow with." The air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility, and Sebastian realized with startling clarity that he was falling in love with this remarkable woman, this widow who had shown him that strength and gentleness could coexist, that vulnerability was not weakness but courage. 3 days passed in misery for both Sebastian and Charlotte. Sebastian threw himself into his ducal duties with grim determination, attending parliamentary sessions, reviewing estate matters, and accepting social invitations he would normally have declined. But nothing could fill the void that had opened in his chest, the aching sense of loss that reminded him constantly of what he'd given up. Charlotte maintained her composure during the day, caring for Timothy and managing her household with her usual efficiency. But at night, alone in her room, she wept for what might have been, for the love she'd discovered and lost almost in the same breath. Timothy, meanwhile, was inconsolable. He asked daily when Sebastian would visit again, why his new friend had stopped coming to see them, whether he'd done something wrong. Charlotte's explanations that Sebastian was very busy with important Duke matters satisfied him less each day. On the 4th morning, Timothy's persistent questions finally broke through Charlotte's careful control. "But Mama, he promised to show me how Wellington arranged his troops at Waterloo. He said we'd build a proper battlefield with my soldiers. Why won't he come back?" "Timothy, I've explained. You said he was busy, but that's not true, is it?" The boy's brown eyes, so much like her own, were filled with a wisdom beyond his years. "You're sad, and he's probably sad too. Just like you were sad when Papa died, and I was sad. But Sebastian made us happy, didn't he? So why can't we make him happy anymore?" Charlotte knelt beside her son, her heart breaking at his earnest confusion. "Sometimes, darling, grown-ups have to make difficult choices. Sebastian is a very important man, and people expect certain things from him." "That's stupid," Timothy declared with 5-year-old directness. "Papa always said the most important thing was to be kind and to love people. Sebastian is kind, and I think he loves us. Don't you love him too, Mama?" The simple question shattered Charlotte's remaining defenses. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I do love him." "Then why?" Timothy's question was interrupted by a commotion from the street outside. Raised voices, the sound of running feet, and then their housekeeper's frantic knock on the parlor door. "Ma'am, come quickly. There's been an accident." Charlotte's blood turned to ice as she rushed to the window. In the street below, a crowd had gathered around an overturned carriage. A horse lay thrashing in its traces, and she could see a small figure lying motionless on the cobblestones. "Timothy," she gasped, spinning around, but her son was right behind her, safe and whole. "No, ma'am," the housekeeper said breathlessly. "It's little Mary from the house across the way. She ran into the street chasing her ball, and the carriage couldn't stop in time. The driver says she's hurt bad, and her mother's beside herself." Without hesitation, Charlotte grabbed her cloak and medical supplies. She'd learned basic nursing during William's illness and had often helped neighbors in times of crisis. But as she reached the scene, she realized the child's injuries were beyond her limited skills. "Someone needs to fetch a doctor," she called out, but the nearest physician was several streets away, and precious time was slipping by. "I'll go," a familiar voice said behind her, and Charlotte turned to see Sebastian pushing through the crowd. He must have been passing by when the accident occurred. Their eyes met for a brief, charged moment before he took command of the situation with the natural authority of his position. "You," he pointed to a nearby footman, "fetch Dr. Morrison from Harley Street immediately. Tell him the Duke of Ravenshollow requests his urgent attendance." The man ran off without question. "You," he addressed another bystander, "help me move this carriage so we can free the horse safely." Within minutes, Sebastian had organized the chaos, directing the crowd with calm efficiency while Charlotte knelt beside the injured child, doing what she could to comfort both the little girl and her distraught mother. "She's breathing steadily," Charlotte reported quietly to Sebastian as he knelt beside her. "But her leg is badly injured, and she hasn't regained consciousness." "The doctor will be here soon," Sebastian assured her, then looked down at the pale child with genuine concern. "She can't be more than 7 years old." 6, the mother sobbed. She just turned 6 last month. Oh, my baby, my sweet baby. Charlotte took the woman's hands in hers. She's strong, Mrs. Patterson. Children are remarkably resilient. We must have faith. For the next hour, Sebastian and Charlotte worked side by side, caring for the injured child until the doctor arrived and took over her treatment. When Mary was finally stable enough to be moved to her home, Sebastian insisted on carrying her himself, his strong arms gentle as he transported the small patient. Only after the crisis had passed, when little Mary was resting comfortably with her grateful parents and the crowd had dispersed, did Sebastian and Charlotte find themselves alone together on the now quiet street. "Thank you," Charlotte said softly. "You didn't have to help, but—" "Of course I did," Sebastian interrupted. "How could I not?" They stood in the fading afternoon light, the events of the past hour having stripped away all pretense between them. In the face of a child suffering, their careful social boundaries seemed not just irrelevant but cruel. "I've missed you," Sebastian said quietly. "These past few days have been terrible," Charlotte finished. "Sebastian, No," he said firmly, stepping closer. "Let me speak first. I understand why you sent me away. I know what society expects, what people are saying. But Charlotte, I don't care anymore. I can't care. These few days without you and Timothy have shown me what my life will be like if I continue to let others dictate my choices. Empty. Cold. Meaningless. But the scandal. Let them talk," Sebastian said fiercely. "Let them whisper and speculate and disapprove. I've spent 32 years living for their approval, and what has it gained me? A title, wealth, respect, and complete isolation from everything that makes life worth living." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "Sebastian, you don't understand what you're saying. If you defy society's expectations, if you choose me, you'll lose everything." "I'll lose nothing that matters," he said, taking her hands in his. "Charlotte, I love you. I love Timothy. I love the warmth and laughter you've brought into my life. I love the way you see the world, the way you care for others, the way you've made me want to be a better man. If society can't accept that, then society can go to hell. Sebastian. Marry me," he said suddenly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know it's sudden, I know there will be difficulties, but marry me, Charlotte. Let me be a proper father to Timothy. Let us build the family we've all been longing for." Charlotte stared at him, her heart pounding with hope and terror in equal measure. "You can't possibly mean—" "I've never meant anything more in my life," Sebastian said, pulling her closer. "I know I'm asking you to weather a storm of gossip and disapproval. I know it won't be easy. But Charlotte, I promise you this, I will never let anyone hurt you or Timothy. I will stand between you and society's cruelty. I will love you and protect you for the rest of my days." Tears streamed down Charlotte's face as she looked into his earnest gray eyes and saw not the formidable Duke of Ravenshollow, but simply the man who had wept alone in Hyde Park, who had played soldiers with her son, who had just spent an hour caring for an injured child without thought for his expensive clothes or his reputation. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Sebastian, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, right there on the street, with all the passion and tenderness that had been building between them since that snowy Christmas Eve. And for the first time in either of their lives, they didn't care who might be watching. The announcement of Sebastian's engagement to Charlotte Ashworth sent shockwaves through London society that reverberated for weeks. The Morning Chronicle ran a thinly veiled editorial questioning the wisdom of such an unequal alliance, while drawing rooms across Mayfair buzzed with speculation and disapproval. "It's absolutely scandalous," Lady Pemberton declared to her circle of friends over tea. "The Duke of Ravenshollow, one of the most eligible men in England, throwing himself away on a nobody. That woman must have used some powerful enchantment to snare him. I heard she deliberately placed herself in his path," whispered Lady Thornfield. "Used her child as bait, if you can imagine such a thing. Really, what decent woman would stoop so low? The gossip was relentless and cruel, painting Charlotte as everything from a scheming fortune hunter to a woman of questionable morals. Sebastian, meanwhile, faced a different kind of pressure, the cold disapproval of his peers and the frank warnings of his advisers. "Your Grace," his solicitor, Mr. Blackthorne, said during a tense meeting in Sebastian's study, "I must urge you to reconsider this engagement. The marriage settlements alone will cause complications, given Mrs. Ashworth's modest circumstances. But more importantly, this alliance will damage your standing in Parliament. Lord Hartwell has already suggested that your judgment has become compromised." "My judgment has never been clearer," Sebastian replied icily. "I'm marrying a woman of intelligence, compassion, and strength. If Lord Hartwell finds that objectionable, perhaps he should examine his own character rather than questioning mine. But Your Grace, consider the practical implications. Mrs. Ashworth has no connections, no influence in society. She cannot advance your political interests or enhance your social standing. In fact, she may well damage both." Sebastian stood abruptly, his patience finally exhausted. "Mr. Blackthorne, I am not marrying a political alliance or a social ornament. I am marrying the woman I love. If you cannot support that decision, perhaps it's time to find new legal counsel." The solicitor paled. "Your Grace, I meant no offense. You simply assume that my personal happiness is less important than society's approval. You're wrong. Good day, Mr. Blackthorne." But the pressure wasn't limited to his professional advisers. Sebastian's own relatives emerged from their various estates to express their horror at his choice. His cousin, the Earl of Whitmore, arrived unannounced one morning with his wife, both wearing expressions of grim determination. "Sebastian," the Earl began without preamble, "this madness must stop. You're making yourself a laughingstock, and by extension, you're damaging the entire family name." "How so?" Sebastian asked coolly, not rising from his desk where he'd been reviewing estate matters. "By proposing to marry beneath your station," Lady Whitmore interjected shrilly. "Really, Sebastian, if you needed a wife, there are dozens of suitable young ladies who would be honored by your attention. Lady Catherine Pemberton, for instance, or Miss Henrietta Thornfield. Either would make an excellent duchess." "I'm sure they would," Sebastian agreed. "For someone else. I, however, am marrying Charlotte Ashworth." "You're thinking with your heart instead of your head," the Earl said bluntly. "Or perhaps with something else entirely. If the woman has caught your fancy, make her your mistress by all means, but don't make her your duchess." Sebastian was on his feet in an instant, his face dark with fury. "You will not speak of my future wife in such terms. Ever. Do I make myself clear?" Lady Whitmore gasped at his tone, while her husband took a step back, clearly recognizing the dangerous edge in Sebastian's voice. "I meant no disrespect to the lady herself," the Earl said carefully. "But Sebastian, you must see reason. The difference in your stations is irrelevant to me. Charlotte is a gentlewoman, the widow of an honorable man. She has conducted herself with perfect propriety throughout our acquaintance. If society chooses to find fault with that, the failing is society's, not hers." Meanwhile, Charlotte was facing her own battles. The ostracism was swift and merciless. Former friends crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. Invitations stopped arriving. Even tradesmen began treating her with barely concealed disdain, as if her engagement to a duke had somehow made her suspect rather than elevated. The worst moment came when she encountered Mrs. Pemberton and her daughter at the milliner's shop. The older woman's voice carried clearly across the small space, obviously intended for Charlotte to hear. "I feel quite sorry for the Duke," Mrs. Pemberton said loudly. "Clearly, he's not thinking clearly in his grief. When he comes to his senses, he'll realize what a terrible mistake he's made. Though by then, of course, it may be too late to salvage his reputation." "Perhaps someone should speak to him," Lady Catherine suggested. Surely his family or close friends could make him see reason before he ruins himself completely. Charlotte's cheeks burned, but she held her head high as she completed her purchase and left the shop. It was only when she reached the safety of her carriage that she allowed the tears to fall. The pressure was affecting Timothy as well. The child didn't understand why people who had once been friendly now looked at them with disapproval, why his mother seemed sad even when she smiled, why Sebastian visited less frequently than before. "Mama," he said one evening as Charlotte tucked him into bed, "are you and Sebastian still getting married?" "Yes, darling." "Why do you ask?" "Because Mrs. Henderson said Sebastian might change his mind. She said dukes don't usually marry people like us." Timothy's voice was small and uncertain. "What does that mean, Mama? What's wrong with us?" Charlotte's heart broke a little more. "There's nothing wrong with us, Timothy. Some people think that because Sebastian is a duke, he should only marry another duke's daughter. But Sebastian doesn't agree with those people. He loves us just as we are. But what if they make him change his mind?" It was the fear that haunted Charlotte's own sleepless nights. What if the constant pressure, the social ostracism, the damage to Sebastian's reputation eventually became too much? What if he decided that their love wasn't worth the cost? "He won't change his mind," she said firmly, as much for her own benefit as Timothy's. "Sebastian is the strongest, most honorable man I know. He doesn't let other people make his decisions for him." But even as she spoke the words, Charlotte wondered how long Sebastian's resolve could withstand the relentless assault on his choice. Every day brought new challenges, new attempts to separate them, new reasons to doubt whether their love could survive the storm of society's disapproval. The crisis came to a head during a particularly brutal evening at Lord Hartwell's dinner party, which Sebastian attended alone at Charlotte's insistence. She refused to subject herself to the public humiliation of appearing where she wasn't wanted. Throughout the meal, Sebastian endured pointed comments about his unfortunate entanglement and thinly veiled suggestions that he might still extricate himself from his engagement. The final straw came when Lord Pemberton, emboldened by wine and the support of his peers, addressed Sebastian directly across the dinner table. "Ravens Hollow, we're all friends here, so I'll speak plainly. This marriage you're contemplating, it's beneath you. The woman may be perfectly respectable in her way, but she's not Duchess material. You owe it to your title, to your family name, to choose a bride who can enhance rather than diminish your standing." The table fell silent, all eyes on Sebastian. He set down his wine glass with deliberate care, his grey eyes cold as winter steel. "Lord Pemberton," he said quietly, "you speak of what I owe to my title and my family name. Let me tell you what I think I owe them: honor, integrity, and the courage to choose love over convention. Charlotte Ashworth is worth a dozen of your so-called suitable brides. She has shown me more genuine affection in a few weeks than I've received from society in 32 years. If you find that beneath me, then perhaps it's your understanding of worth that needs examination." He stood, his tall frame commanding attention. "I will marry Charlotte Ashworth in 3 weeks' time, as planned. Those who wish me well are welcome to attend. Those who don't are welcome to stay away. Good evening." Sebastian left the party amid shocked silence, but he knew the battle was far from over. If anything, his public defiance had only intensified society's determination to separate him from Charlotte. The question was whether their love would prove strong enough to survive the siege. The breaking point came on a grey February morning, 3 days before their planned wedding. Charlotte stood in her modest parlor, staring at the morning papers spread across her tea table, each one containing some variation of the same devastating story. The Duke's folly, questions raised about Mrs. Ashworth's past. A widow's secret, what his grace doesn't know. The fortune hunter's web, how one woman ensnared a duke. The articles were masterpieces of innuendo and half-truth, painting Charlotte as a calculating woman who had deliberately sought out Sebastian in his grief, using her child as a tool to manipulate his emotions. They questioned her late husband's debts, suggested improprieties in her behavior, and implied that she was nothing more than a common fortune hunter who had successfully deceived one of England's most powerful men. None of it was true, but that hardly mattered. The damage was done. Charlotte's hands trembled as she read the most damaging piece, which suggested that Timothy might not even be William's legitimate son, a cruel lie that struck at the very heart of her family's honor. "Mama?" Timothy appeared in the doorway, still in his nightclothes, his young face creased with worry. "Why are you crying?" Charlotte hastily folded the papers, wiping her tears. "It's nothing, darling. Just grown-up troubles." But Timothy was too perceptive, too aware of the tension that had surrounded them for weeks. "Is it about Sebastian? Are people still saying mean things?" Before Charlotte could answer, their housekeeper appeared, her face grave. "Ma'am, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says he represents his grace." Charlotte's heart sank. She knew, with terrible certainty, what this meant. Sebastian was ending their engagement. The pressure had finally become too much, and he was sending an emissary to deliver the news rather than face her himself. The gentleman who entered her parlor was elderly, impeccably dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. He introduced himself as Mr. Whitmore, Sebastian's private secretary. "Mrs. Ashworth," he began carefully, "I come on behalf of His Grace with a most difficult message. Given the recent developments in the press, His Grace feels it would be best if the wedding were postponed indefinitely." The words hit Charlotte like physical blows, even though she'd been expecting them. "I see," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "His Grace wishes me to assure you that this decision brings him no pleasure. He holds you in the highest regard. However, the current circumstances make it impossible to proceed without causing irreparable damage to both your reputations and, more importantly, to young Master Timothy's future prospects." Charlotte forced herself to remain composed, though inside she was crumbling. "Of course. His Grace is quite right to be concerned about the scandal. His Grace also wishes to provide for you and the boy," Mr. Whitmore continued, producing an envelope. "This settlement will ensure your financial security and Master Timothy's education. It's quite generous, I assure you." The offer of money was the final humiliation. Charlotte stood, her spine straight despite her breaking heart. "Please inform His Grace that we require no financial assistance. We managed quite well before his interest in our welfare, and we shall continue to do so. Mrs. Ashworth, please reconsider. His Grace is most anxious that you and the boy should not suffer for my presumption in thinking I could marry above my station." Charlotte's voice was steady, but her eyes blazed with hurt and anger. "Please assure His Grace that I understand perfectly. The Duke of Ravenshollow cannot afford to ally himself with someone of my questionable character." Mr. Whitmore looked genuinely distressed. "Mrs. Ashworth, you misunderstand. His Grace's feelings for you haven't changed. But the attacks on your reputation have become so vicious, so damaging, that he's decided to cut his losses," Charlotte finished. "I understand completely. Please go." After the secretary left, Charlotte sank into a chair, finally allowing her careful composure to crumble. The pain was worse than when William had died, because then she'd been losing someone to forces beyond anyone's control. This time, she was losing Sebastian to the very society pressures she'd warned him about from the beginning. Timothy crept into the room, his small face solemn. "Mama, is Sebastian not going to marry us anymore?" Charlotte pulled her son into her arms, holding him close as her tears fell freely. "No, darling. Sebastian has decided, it's better if we don't get married after all. Because of what those people were saying. The mean things in the newspapers." Charlotte was startled. She hadn't realized Timothy knew about the gossip. "How do you?" "I heard Mrs. Patterson talking to Cook yesterday. She said terrible people were writing lies about us, and it might make Sebastian change his mind." Timothy pulled back to look at his mother's face. "But Mama, if Sebastian loves us, why would he let other people's lies matter more?" It was the question Charlotte had been asking herself, and she had no good answer. Sometimes, Timothy, even when people love each other very much, other things get in the way. Important things, like duties and responsibilities. That's stupid, Timothy declared with 5-year-old certainty. Papa always said love was the most important thing. He said everything else was just details. Charlotte's heart broke a little more. Your papa was a wise man, darling. But sometimes the world is more complicated than we'd like it to be. Meanwhile, across Mayfair, Sebastian was experiencing his own hell. He sat in his study, staring at the same newspapers that had devastated Charlotte, his hands clenched into fists. The lies were so outrageous, so obviously fabricated, that he couldn't understand how anyone could believe them. But believe them they did. Even some of his closest associates had begun to distance themselves, their faith in his judgment shaken by the constant barrage of negative press. You did the right thing, his cousin, the Earl of Whitmore, said, settling into the chair across from Sebastian's desk. I know it was difficult, but really, Sebastian, you had no choice. The woman's reputation is in tatters. Marrying her now would have destroyed you both. Sebastian looked up, his gray eyes cold with fury. I sent Whitmore to postpone the wedding, not cancel it. There's a difference. Is there? The Earl asked gently. Sebastian, be realistic. This scandal isn't going away. If anything, it will only get worse. The kindest thing you can do for Mrs. Ashworth is to let her fade back into obscurity. Eventually, people will forget, and she can rebuild her life quietly. Without me. Without you, the Earl confirmed. I'm sorry, Sebastian. I know you cared for her. But some prices are simply too high to pay. After his cousin left, Sebastian remained alone in his study, surrounded by the trappings of his wealth and position. The very things that society insisted made him superior to Charlotte now felt like chains binding him to a life of cold duty and emotional emptiness. He thought of Timothy's bright smile, of Charlotte's gentle strength, of the warmth and laughter they'd brought into his carefully ordered world. He thought of Christmas Eve in Hyde Park, when a grieving child had seen a stranger's tears and offered comfort without thought of consequence. Perhaps his cousin was right. Perhaps some prices were too high to pay. But as Sebastian sat alone in his grand, empty house, he began to wonder whether the price of keeping Charlotte and Timothy might be lower than the price of losing them. The question was whether it was already too late to find out. Sebastian endured exactly 48 hours of life without Charlotte and Timothy before he realized that he'd made the greatest mistake of his life. The silence in his grand house was deafening, the emptiness crushing. Every room reminded him of what he'd lost, the parlor where he'd imagined Charlotte taking tea with guests, the nursery he'd begun planning for Timothy, the master bedroom where he'd dreamed of waking beside the woman he loved. On the morning of what should have been their wedding day, Sebastian stood at his study window, watching the gray London dawn break over Grosvenor Square. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was once again alone, just as he'd been that snowy Christmas Eve when Timothy had found him weeping in Hyde Park. The difference was that this time, his isolation was entirely of his own making. A sharp knock interrupted his brooding. His butler entered with obvious reluctance, carrying a silver tray bearing a single letter. Your Grace, this arrived by special messenger. The boy insisted it was urgent. Sebastian recognized Timothy's careful handwriting immediately, his heart clenching as he broke the childish wax seal. Dear Sebastian, Mama says I shouldn't write to you because you are very busy being a duke and don't have time for us anymore. But I think she is wrong. I think you are sad just like we are sad. I don't understand why you changed your mind about marrying us. Mama won't tell me, but I heard Mrs. Patterson say it was because of lies in the newspapers. That seems very silly to me. When Tommy Henderson told lies about me at school, Papa said the truth always wins if you're brave enough to tell it. Are you not brave enough, Sebastian? I thought dukes were supposed to be very brave. I miss you. Mama misses you too, even though she pretends she doesn't. She cries at night when she thinks I'm asleep, just like she did when Papa died. Please come back. We love you. Your friend, Timothy. P.S. I still have the soldiers you gave me. I've been practicing the Battle of Waterloo, but it's not as fun without you. Sebastian read the letter 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. A 5-year-old child had shown more courage than he had, more wisdom than all of society's arbiters combined. Timothy was right, he hadn't been brave enough. He'd let fear and social pressure override everything that truly mattered. But it wasn't too late. Not yet. Sebastian strode to his desk and began writing furiously. Letters to newspaper editors, demanding retractions of the lies printed about Charlotte. Letters to his solicitors, instructing them to pursue legal action against anyone who continued to spread false information. Letters to every member of Parliament he'd ever called friend, asking for their support. But most importantly, he wrote a letter to Charlotte herself, not the formal, distant communication he'd sent through his secretary, but a raw, honest plea from his heart. My dearest Charlotte. I have been a coward and a fool. In trying to protect you from society's cruelty, I have inflicted a far greater cruelty by abandoning you when you needed me most. I let fear override love, let the opinions of people who don't matter destroy what matters most in the world. You warned me from the beginning about the difficulties we would face. You tried to send me away to spare me the scandal. But I convinced you to trust me, to believe that our love was stronger than society's prejudices. Then, at the first real test of that conviction, I failed you utterly. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know the pain I've caused may be beyond repair. But Charlotte, I'm asking anyway, because I cannot live without you and Timothy. I would rather face 1,000 scandals with you by my side than spend another day in this cold, empty existence without you. If you'll have me, if you can find it in your heart to trust me again, I promise you this, I will never again let anyone or anything come between us. I will stand with you against whatever storms may come. I will be the man Timothy believes me to be, the man you deserve. I love you with every fiber of my being. Please don't let my moment of cowardice destroy what we've built together. Forever yours, Sebastian. He sealed the letter and summoned his fastest rider, then set about implementing the rest of his plan. If society wanted a battle, he would give them one, but this time, he would be fighting for love instead of surrendering to fear. His first stop was the offices of the Morning Chronicle, where he demanded to see the editor immediately. Mr. Thornberry, a thin, nervous man who clearly recognized the dangerous glint in Sebastian's eyes, received him with obvious anxiety. Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure. There was nothing pleasurable about the lies your paper printed regarding Mrs. Ashworth, Sebastian said coldly. You will print a full retraction in tomorrow's edition, along with a public apology. Your Grace, I'm afraid that's not possible. We stand by our reporting. Your reporting, Sebastian interrupted, consists of unsubstantiated gossip and malicious lies. I have here sworn statements from 3 witnesses who can attest to the falsity of your claims about Mrs. Ashworth's character and her late husband's finances. He placed the documents on the editor's desk with deliberate force. You will retract your lies, Mr. Thornberry, or I will sue your paper for libel and ensure that every other publication in London knows exactly how little regard you have for the truth. The editor's face paled as he scanned the legal documents. Your Grace, surely we can reach some accommodation. The only accommodation I'll accept is the truth. You have until tomorrow's edition to decide whether you prefer honesty or bankruptcy. Sebastian's next stop was White's, where he knew he would find the core group of men who had been most vocal in their opposition to his marriage. He entered the club's main room with the bearing of a man going into battle, his presence immediately commanding attention. Lord Pemberton, Lord Hartwell, and several others were gathered around their usual table, their conversation dying as Sebastian approached. Gentlemen, Sebastian said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. I understand you've all been quite concerned about my choice of bride. I thought I should address your concerns directly. Sebastian, Lord Hartwell began uncomfortably, perhaps this isn't the place. On the contrary, this is exactly the place, Sebastian replied. You've all felt free to discuss my private affairs publicly. It seems only fair that I should respond in kind. He looked around the room, meeting each man's gaze directly. You've called Charlotte Ashworth a fortune hunter, a woman of questionable morals, an unsuitable match for a duke. Let me tell you what she actually is, a woman who lost her husband to illness and has raised her son with grace and dignity despite her grief. A woman who showed kindness to a stranger in his darkest hour, asking nothing in return. A woman who tried repeatedly to send me away because she feared the very scandal you've all been so eager to create. Sebastian, Lord Pemberton interjected, we understand your attachment to the lady. But surely you can see. What I can see, Sebastian cut him off, is that Charlotte Ashworth has more honor in her little finger than the lot of you combined. She's shown me what real courage looks like, what genuine love means. If you find that threatening to your narrow view of what makes someone worthy, then perhaps you should examine your own characters rather than questioning hers. He straightened to his full, imposing height. I am marrying Charlotte Ashworth. Those who wish to celebrate with us are welcome. Those who don't are welcome to stay away. But understand this, anyone who continues to spread lies about my future wife will answer to me personally. The room remained silent as Sebastian turned and walked out, leaving behind a wake of shocked whispers and grudging respect. Meanwhile, Charlotte was in her small garden, trying to find solace in the simple task of tending her winter roses, when her housekeeper appeared with Sebastian's letter. Her hands shook as she read his words, hope and pain warring in her chest. Timothy, who had been unusually quiet since Sebastian's abandonment, looked up from where he sat on the garden bench. Is that from Sebastian, Mama? Charlotte nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Is he coming back? I don't know, darling. He says he wants to, but... But you don't believe him, Timothy said with startling perception. Because he left us before when things got difficult. Charlotte knelt beside her son, taking his small hands in hers. Timothy, sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Big mistakes that hurt the people they love. Sebastian made such a mistake, and now he's asking us to forgive him. Do you want to forgive him? Yes, Charlotte whispered. But wanting to and being able to are different things. Trust, once broken, is very hard to repair. Timothy was quiet for a long moment, his young face serious. Papa used to say that love means forgiving people when they make mistakes, as long as they're truly sorry and promise to do better. Your papa was a wise man. So maybe we should give Sebastian another chance. He sounded very sorry in his letter to me. Before Charlotte could respond, they heard the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones. Through the garden gate, they could see a familiar figure approaching, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and gray eyes that held a mixture of hope and desperate determination. Sebastian had come to fight for his family. Sebastian stood at Charlotte's garden gate, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and terror. Through the wrought iron bars, he could see her kneeling beside Timothy on a small bench, both of them watching him with expressions he couldn't quite read. The afternoon sun caught the gold highlights in Charlotte's brown hair, and he was struck anew by her quiet beauty, by how much he'd missed simply looking at her. Charlotte, he said softly, his voice carrying across the small space between them. May I come in? She stood slowly, her movements careful and controlled. Timothy, why don't you go inside and ask cook for some biscuits? I need to speak with Sebastian alone. But Mama. Go on, darling. We'll only be a few minutes. Timothy looked between the two adults, his young face troubled, then ran toward the house. But Sebastian noticed he didn't go inside. Instead, the boy pressed himself against a window where he could watch the proceedings, clearly unwilling to miss whatever was about to unfold. Charlotte approached the gate but didn't open it, maintaining the barrier between them. You shouldn't have come, Sebastian. Nothing has changed. The scandal, the gossip, it's all still there. Everything has changed, Sebastian replied firmly. I've changed. Charlotte, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know I failed you when you needed me most. But I'm here to tell you that I will never make that mistake again. How can you be so certain? Charlotte's voice was steady, but Sebastian could see the pain in her eyes. When the pressure becomes too great again, when society turns its full fury on us, what's to stop you from walking away once more? Sebastian reached through the gate's bars, his fingers just touching hers. Because I've learned what life is like without you. These past few days have been hell, Charlotte. I've been a ghost in my own house, going through the motions of living while feeling absolutely nothing. I thought I was protecting you by ending our engagement, but I was really protecting myself, from scandal, from gossip, from the possibility of failure. And now I realize that losing you is the only failure that matters. Sebastian's voice grew stronger, more certain. I've spent the morning visiting newspaper editors, demanding retractions of the lies they printed about you. I've spoken to every man at my club, making it clear that anyone who continues to malign your character will answer to me personally. I've instructed my solicitors to pursue legal action against anyone who spreads false information about our family. Charlotte's eyes widened. Sebastian, you can't fight all of London society. Watch me, he said with grim determination. Charlotte, I should have done this from the beginning. I should have stood up and defended you instead of cowering behind social conventions. I should have shown them that the Duke of Ravenshollow chooses his own path, regardless of their approval. But the consequences. The only consequence I fear is losing you, Sebastian interrupted. Everything else, the gossip, the social ostracism, the political ramifications, none of it matters if I don't have you and Timothy in my life. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with those perceptive brown eyes that had seen through his defenses from the very beginning. You hurt me, Sebastian. More than I thought possible. When your secretary came with news of the postponement, when he offered me money as if I were some discarded mistress, I felt as though my heart had been torn from my chest. Sebastian's face contorted with pain and self-loathing. Charlotte, I never meant. I know you didn't, she said softly. But intentions don't erase the damage done. How can I trust you not to abandon us again the moment things become difficult? Because I'm not the same man who sent Whitmore to you 3 days ago, Sebastian said desperately. That man was a coward who let fear override love. This man, the man standing before you now, has learned that a life without love isn't worth living, no matter how respectable or socially acceptable it might be. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, holding it up so she could see it through the gate. This is your ring, Charlotte. The one I had made for you before I lost my courage. I've been carrying it with me, hoping against hope that you might give me another chance to prove myself worthy of you. Charlotte stared at the ring box, her eyes filling with tears. Sebastian. I love you, he said simply. I love Timothy. I want us to be a family, Charlotte. I want to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to teach Timothy to ride and shoot and be a gentleman. I want to give you more children, if you'll have them. I want to grow old with you, facing whatever challenges life brings us, together. The scandal will fade, Sebastian said firmly. Scandals always do, especially when they're built on lies. But our love, Charlotte, that's real. That's permanent. That's worth fighting for. Charlotte looked toward the window where Timothy was pressed against the glass, his small face anxious and hopeful. Then she looked back at Sebastian, seeing not the formidable Duke of Ravenshollow, but the man who had wept alone in Hyde Park, who had played soldiers with her son, who had just spent the morning defending her honor across London. If I say yes, she said quietly, if I agree to marry you, there can be no more wavering. No more letting other people's opinions influence your decisions. We'll face whatever comes together, as a united front. Together, Sebastian agreed solemnly. Always together. Charlotte reached for the gate latch, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened the barrier between them. Sebastian stepped into the garden, and suddenly they were in each other's arms, holding tight as if they could make up for all the pain and separation of the past few days. I love you too, Charlotte whispered against his chest. I tried to stop, tried to protect my heart, but I couldn't. You've become part of me, Sebastian. Part of us. Mama. Timothy's voice rang out as he burst from the house, running toward them with joy radiating from his small frame. Does this mean Sebastian is staying? Does this mean we're going to be a family? Sebastian knelt down to Timothy's level, opening his arms as the boy launched himself forward. If your mama will have me, if you'll have me, then yes. We're going to be a family. I knew you'd come back, Timothy said confidently, hugging Sebastian tightly. I told Mama you were just scared, like I was scared when Papa died. But brave people don't stay scared forever. Sebastian looked up at Charlotte over Timothy's head, seeing the love and forgiveness shining in her eyes. No, he said softly, they don't. 6 months later, Christmas Eve, 1841. The Duchess of Ravenshollow stood at the window of the grand ballroom in Sebastian's, their, London mansion, watching the snow fall gently over Grosvenor Square. Behind her, the sounds of their Christmas Eve party filled the air, laughter, conversation, the tinkling of champagne glasses, and Timothy's excited voice as he regaled a group of adults with some elaborate story. Regrets? Sebastian's voice came from behind her, his arms sliding around her waist as he pulled her back against his chest. Charlotte leaned into her husband's warmth, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. None whatsoever. You. Only that it took me so long to find you, Sebastian murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. And that I was foolish enough to almost lose you. But you didn't lose us, Charlotte pointed out, covering his hands with hers. We're here. We're yours. We're a family. Through the window, they could see Hyde Park in the distance, the same park where a grieving duke had met a compassionate child on a snowy Christmas Eve exactly 1 year ago. It seemed like a lifetime ago, yet Charlotte could still remember every detail of that first encounter, Sebastian's tears, Timothy's innocent kindness, the moment when 3 broken hearts had begun to heal each other. Papa Sebastian. Timothy's voice called out, using the title he'd chosen for his stepfather. Come see. Lord Pemberton is letting me show him the proper way to arrange cavalry. Sebastian and Charlotte exchanged amused glances. The very man who had once called their marriage scandalous was now one of Timothy's most devoted admirers, completely charmed by the boy's enthusiasm and intelligence. Society has a remarkably short memory, Charlotte observed, watching as several of London's most influential ladies clustered around the refreshment table, chatting amiably as if they'd never whispered cruel gossip about the new Duchess. Or perhaps they've simply realized what I knew from the beginning, Sebastian replied, turning her in his arms so he could look into her eyes. That you're extraordinary, Charlotte Blackwood. That any man would be lucky to call you his wife, and I'm the most fortunate of all. Even when I'm round as a barrel? Charlotte asked, her hand moving instinctively to the gentle curve of her belly, where their first child together was growing. Especially then, Sebastian said, his eyes soft with wonder and love. Though Timothy insists it's going to be a girl so he can teach her about soldiers and battles. Heaven help us all if we produce a daughter with Timothy's confidence and your stubbornness, Charlotte laughed. She'll be perfect, Sebastian said with absolute certainty. Just like her mother. As the evening wound down and their guests began to depart, the small family found themselves alone in the parlor, Timothy curled up on the sofa between his parents, fighting sleep as he always did on Christmas Eve. Tell me the story again, he mumbled, his eyes drooping despite his best efforts to stay awake. About how you and Mama met. Again? Charlotte asked, smoothing his dark hair. You've heard it a dozen times. But I like it, Timothy protested. It's the best story ever. Better than any of the books in the library. Sebastian settled more comfortably on the sofa, pulling both Charlotte and Timothy closer. Well, it was a snowy Christmas Eve, much like tonight. I was walking alone in Hyde Park, feeling very sorry for myself, when I met a small boy who was far wiser than he had any right to be. As Sebastian told the familiar story, his voice warm with love and gratitude, Charlotte felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was what happiness looked like, not the grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but these quiet moments of perfect peace, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Outside, the snow continued to fall over London, blanketing the city in pristine white. And in the warm glow of the Raven's Hollow parlor, a family that had been born from grief and loneliness celebrated the miracle of love that had brought them together and made them whole. Timothy finally succumbed to sleep, his small body relaxed and trusting between his parents. Sebastian carefully lifted the boy, carrying him upstairs to his bedroom while Charlotte followed, both of them moving with the quiet efficiency of parents who had done this countless times before. After tucking Timothy into his bed, they stood for a moment in the doorway, watching their son sleep peacefully surrounded by his beloved toy soldiers and the various treasures he'd accumulated over the past year. "He's grown so much," Charlotte whispered. "He has," Sebastian agreed. "But then, so have we all." Hand in hand, they walked to their own bedroom, where a fire crackled warmly in the grate and the bed was turned down invitingly. As Charlotte prepared for sleep, Sebastian stood at the window, looking out at the snowy night. "What are you thinking about?" Charlotte asked, joining him at the window. "About how different this Christmas Eve is from last year," Sebastian replied, wrapping his arms around her. "Last year, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. I never imagined that losing my mother would ultimately lead me to you and Timothy, to this life we've built together. Perhaps," Charlotte said softly, "she had a hand in bringing us together. Perhaps she knew you needed us as much as we needed you." Sebastian considered this, thinking of his mother's gentle nature, her quiet wisdom, her deep desire for his happiness. "I think she would have loved you both very much. And I think she would be proud of the man you've become," Charlotte replied. "The husband and father you've chosen to be." As they settled into bed, Charlotte curled against Sebastian's side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. In a few hours, it would be Christmas morning, and Timothy would wake them with his excitement about presents and breakfast and all the traditions they were still creating as a family. But for now, in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Sebastian and Charlotte held each other close and marveled at the miracle of their love, a love that had survived scandal and separation, doubt and fear, emerging stronger and more precious than ever. "Merry Christmas, my love," Sebastian whispered into the darkness. "Merry Christmas," Charlotte replied, pressing a soft kiss to his chest. And outside their window, the snow continued to fall over London, covering the world in beauty and promise, just as it had on that magical Christmas Eve when a duke, a widow, and a little boy had found each other and discovered that the greatest gifts in life couldn't be bought or earned, they could only be given freely, with an open heart and the courage to love.